There is an episode of Star Trek where the ship encounters an ancient archive adrift in space originating from some ancient civilization, which, after they access it, begins transforming the ship and possessing the crew as it plays out its mythology.
Oh boy, we got an ancient mask situation here. The what now? This is like the third time it's happened. Stop touching masks!
Captain's log. Once again, the Cerritos was partially transformed into a temple, while I was inhabited by the spirit of Manuki. Starfleet has to come up with a better way to handle these Darcy archive situations.
No, not that episode.
What's going on? Data.
Asaka is waking.
That's the one. Okay, how is the original somehow more ridiculous than the parody? Anyway, this episode uses the sci-fi trope of the alien artifact with incompatible technology that wreaks havoc on the discoverers until they can decode it and save the ship. In this case, the aliens have created an archive that houses their cultural identity. Most people hear the word archive and immediately picture dusty old boxes. First of all, they're not dusty. That would defeat the purpose of archiving them. Second, I would argue the word old in this instance is doing the work of the word boring, and that's not the same thing. Old things are not inherently boring. Neither are archived objects inherently old. What's interesting is that the sci-fi trope is closer to reality than the perception of the general public. An archive is a living repository of knowledge and experience. It can be the preservation of an artist's life's work, the historical record of an entire civilization, or the collective identity of a people. Welcome to the Ho Podcast, History, Ontology, Epistemology. Today's episode, the William Way LGBT Community Center, John J. Wilcox Jr. Archives. The academic definition of an archive is records created in the conduct of affairs of persons and organizations, both private and governmental, for the purpose of carrying forward and/or documenting those affairs. That's not nearly as exciting on paper as it is in real life. The John J. Wilcox Jr. Archives is an extensive collection of personal, organizational, and historical items, artifacts, media, and ephemera documenting the history of Philadelphia's LGBTQ+ community. There are letters and notes, holiday cards, postcards, organizational records like meeting minutes, invoices, and ledgers, personnel files, periodicals, and clippings from magazines, newspapers, and newsletters, audiovisual recordings, photos, artwork, political campaign and protest buttons, stickers and posters, rare books, calendars, travel guides, t-shirts, and leather chaps. Housed within the William Way LGBT Community Center, the Wilcox Archives documents LGBTQ history, culture, and rights movements from the point of view of the greater Philadelphia area. Their explicit mission to collect, describe, interpret, and provide access to these materials, whether they are created by, dealing with, or of special interest to gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender individuals.
Watch your head. It's a really funky building.
I'm 5 feet tall. I never have to watch my head. This is John Andarius, director of the John J. Wilcox Jr. Archives and Library. He's been here in some capacity since about 2014, he thinks.
So this is originally 2 pre-Civil War brownstones.
Oh, wow.
So this was a house here.
Okay.
This was a house here. Okay. So the Engineers Club bought the 2 homes at separate times, but in the late 19th or late 20th century, put the facade on the front to make it look like all one building. And they leveled some of the floors, like the second floor is all one big space. Up here, we're at 2 different levels. And we've got steel beams going through these parts of the building, which creates our little, I call it our little John Malkovich portal.
The William Way LGBT Community Center opened in 1976 as the Gay Community Center of Philadelphia and included a small library. As the library grew, so did the collection of items that tended to come in when books were donated. Photos and notes stuck between pages, magazines stuffed into the donation boxes. The center also began saving its business records. In 1990, the writer, activist, and performance artist Tommy Evacoli Mecca donated the Philadelphia Gay and Lesbian Archives he had founded to the center, considered the nucleus of the present-day archive. In 1997, the center purchased the building at 1315 Spruce Street, which it calls home today. It was renamed the William Way Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Community Center after Bill Way, a city planner who was one of the first Philadelphia city officials to publicly disclose he had HIV, was a big supporter of the center in the 1980s, and passed away from AIDS in 1988. John J. Wilcox Jr., for whom the library and archives are named, passed away in 2011. He was a supporter of the William Way Community Center, funding the library, archives, and youth programs, and establishing an endowment.
So like here, this is a newspaper from 1970 that was produced here in Philadelphia called The Gay Dealer. So basically the story goes that there was an alternative newspaper called the Philadelphia Free Press, and the collective that ran that, some people broke away from that and started what they called the Plain Dealer, and that lasted for about a year in 1970. And then Rizzo was constantly trying to get them shut down and basically succeeded.
That's Frank Rizzo, noted racist and former police commissioner and then mayor of Philadelphia from 1972 to 1980.
You know, it's just the graphics, anyhow, just a really, I don't know, it's sort of very much of its time.
Yeah.
It's just sweet. I really love it. Labyrinth was a lesbian newspaper in the 80s and 90s in Philly. And so we've got the newspapers in the newspaper collection over there, and here are their business records.
Oh, wow.
You know, so here's the good stuff, right? The behind the scenes, the letters to the editor that never got printed, the infighting during meetings, all of that. It's a lot of fun. William Way, the center, was, before it was named William Way, was oddly named Penguin Place.
Why?
So it's this ridiculous story. So in 83, there was going to be a March on Washington, which was, I guess, the 20th anniversary of the Martin Luther King March in 63. And the organizers of that march were getting various constituencies together to plan, and gays and lesbians were like, we're ready, we're going to do this, we want to join. And the leader, the person that was organizing this, said publicly something ridiculous like, gays and lesbians, what's next? Penguin rights? He did not want gays and lesbians in that march. And so Philadelphia, being goofy Philadelphia, decided, we're going to run with this penguin thing.
That's a very Philly thing to do.
And so they showed up in the end, gays and lesbians were allowed to march, but the Philadelphia contingent showed up and someone wore a penguin outfit. And I don't know, it was just in these people's minds, this penguin thing. And, I think that in the late 80s, they were thinking more and more letters are being added to this LGBT thing. I'm not sure if T was even sort of thought about by then, but they're starting to add letters, and I think they're getting a little fearful of that. The center had been through some tumultuous times around adding "and lesbian" to the Gay Community Center of Philadelphia, and I think they were still in a time where it seemed important for people to be able to say they were going to something without saying, "Hey, I'm queer." So I'm going to Penguin Place seemed like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was the craziest thing.
That makes sense.
I think when they lived with it, I think they were sort of like, okay, maybe this wasn't such a great idea. And, eventually they got rid of it. But yeah, for a short while, it was Penguin Place. So starting in the 70s and running through the 90s, there was something called the Gay and Lesbian Switchboard of Philadelphia. And so this was a phone line where you could call in. And this was basically one of their reference apparatus.
Note to the listener, this apparatus he's holding, it's a Rolodex.
So over here, these are all bars, and then the rest are organizations. Gives you a sort of snapshot of what's happening in Philly at that time. It's like some of these are typed out, and then, of course, they cross over them and write in new information, but basically tells you, so someone might call the phone line and be like, I'm visiting from New York. What is a good Levi and Leather bar to go to this weekend? But, they're also, they're unvarnished. So clientele, males 20s to 40s, some hustlers and quasi-hustlers, which they define as lower-class gays without jobs. So, like, the filter is off. Be careful who you take home.
The archives take up several rooms in the building and are categorized by material type. There is a reading room for researchers. Most are academics, students writing their PhD dissertations, professors writing books and articles. Students from junior high school to college doing projects also use the archive on everything from Pride Day history to the AIDS epidemic. Artists come to the archives for inspiration or to scan or photograph items for use in their work. Activists come looking for what other organizations have done in the past. Documentarians and journalists look to the archives to complete their projects, and even community members come just looking for reminders of the past.
I had a man come once who was asking for a very specific issue number of the Philadelphia Gay News, and did we have it? And I said, yes, I believe we do. So I went and pulled that for him, and I said, what are you looking for? And he said, that's the issue where I placed a personal ad and my now husband responded. Oh. And I'm just like, oh man, you made my day.
Oh, man.
And he's like, can I photocopy this and include it in my anniversary card? Well, of course, yes.
Items in the collection arrive in a variety of ways, and the archive has policies that dictate how they decide what to accept. Donations come from people from all walks of life, the well-known and the unknown. Some people simply drop by and leave items at the desk for the curators to pick up, and some contact the archives in advance to make plans for a donation. Some material comes together as a unit. The items represent someone's life in that an individual produced it themselves or collected the items, or they otherwise hold together as a thematic collection, saying something about a person or topic. Those finds are accepted together and stay together as a named collection, and are generally limited to the Philadelphia area LGBTQ+ history, people, and culture. Pieces may be donated together that aren't related, like a poster, t-shirt, or photo album. In those cases, the items are dispersed into what the archive calls artificial collections based on material type. The t-shirts together, the posters together, for example. Some of these pieces might not be from Philly. While many items come in meticulously preserved, some do need tender loving care. They have to be on the lookout for active mold to avoid contaminating the collection, and the Conservation Center in Philadelphia helps with treating those pieces.
One of my colleagues, Bob Skiba, says something about how he's noticed that gay men's porn collections are always meticulously preserved.
Hi, I'm Bob Skiba, and I'm the curator of the LGBT archives here in Philadelphia, here at the William Way Center. And I have been here, next year will be 25 years. I started volunteering here when I moved to Philadelphia in 1999, was teaching swing dance classes, and a friend of mine said, you should volunteer in the archives. I worked on an LGBT history project in 1979 and 1980 in Boston. So I was interviewing people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who were telling me about queer life in America in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So I think I was so inspired by what I heard then that I'm still doing that kind of thing today.
There was a moment in the early 1970s in academia to document queer history that motivated the community to begin collecting and preserving material for posterity. The William Way Archive, like many other LGBTQ archives and libraries in other cities, has the distinction of coming together in a decentralized way, not from arbiters outside the community and not designed by a dominant institution determining what is meaningful for the people it has power over. For example, what the British collected and archived of Indian history and culture does not necessarily accurately reflect India and its people. Historians today are centering the collected material from the colonized, the disadvantaged, and the communities who didn't get to keep their own libraries and archives.
That is one of the problems of doing this kind of an archive and doing this kind of history. Queer history is sometimes intentionally covered up. People die, their families find their things and destroy them because they don't want people to know about their private lives. Sometimes people self-censor their own material. So they hide the things that are most interesting to me, but are the kind of nasty parts, and make sure those aren't seen. Other times, queer things are just overlooked. people think, oh, this isn't important, when it is, when it really is. When, in order to represent that diversity, every story is important.
In the archives are gems in the sediments of LGBTQ history. A collection of buttons from Adebayo, a Cuban American who moved to Philly in the early 60s and died in 2023. Most of these are protest and political slogans like Uppy Women Unite, Nuck Food, Gay Love, It's the Real Thing, made to resemble the Coca-Cola logo, and If You Think Homosexuals Are Revolting, We Are. There are photo albums that once belonged to Philadelphia drag queen Bill Goldberg, who makes many appearances in the collection. His photos of New Year's Eve parties from the 80s, signs from bars that used to exist, important Philadelphia figures, and icons from the community of drag queens are a fascinating snapshot of society and the LGBTQ community's place in it. I'm not being dramatic when I say that throughout human history, persecuted people have had their culture, history, and identity erased in an effort to eradicate their existence. Larissa Levchenko, deputy head at the State Archival Services of Ukraine and history professor at Black Sea National University, wrote in a 2020 paper, quote, "Human history demonstrates the mutual influence of civilizations. Civilizational conflicts often have devastating consequences in the field of preserving the collective human memory and transferring it to future generations. Sometimes, civilizations destroy their historical heritage voluntarily. However, in general, the archives are often taken away by the implacable brutality of the time." Unquote. The necessity of LGBTQ archives cannot be overstated, especially in today's climate.
What do I respond to the most? I respond to the collections that individuals leave us, that tell us things about their personal lives. I think those are the things that resonate with me the most. It's great to have documentation of things that make the news, of laws that were passed, of demonstrations that happened, of pushback that happened. But collections with photos and letters and documents that tell us about the way people dealt with being queer, and in America that was not always very hospitable to queer people, actually more often not than hospitable. So I think in my long career as an LGBT activist, which is now about 55 years, I think the most important thing that queer people have done is to come out, to be visible, to have a voice. So the archives not only helps as a repository for the memories of all the voices that come before, but it helps to amplify the voices that are here today as well, especially for young queer people who come out. It's so important for them to know when they come out that not only are there people around to support them, but there have been, that there are now generations of strong shoulders for them to stand on. And that's why these archives are important.
The archives have begun digitization of periodicals, photo collections, and audio and visual material, both for preservation and for exhibition online. There was a radio show that ran on the University of Pennsylvania's public radio station WXPN from 1974 to 1995. Dozens of tapes of the show from the late 80s to mid-90s are housed in the archives. Unfortunately, audiovisual media can be a two-edged sword.
Yeah, that's
so,
a cool thing.
So, radio shows started in, and I'm forgetting the exact date, but in the early 1970s, originally called Sunshine Gay Dreams, and then later shortened to Gay Dreams. It lasted through, the mid 1990s or so, and had a series of hosts, over that time, like many different hosts. And I think it changed, format as well, but I think it was largely a weekly show at WXPN. One of the collections that we have is a lot of the shows from the early 90s. They're on, a wide variety of media types, like cassette tapes, DAT tapes, digital audio tapes, reel-to-reels of various sizes. We've just recently applied for a grant to have those digitized, because we don't even really know exactly what's on them other than what is written on the covers.
Someone would have to physically listen to.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and one of the things that they say about magnetic media is, it's so imperiled by time, it's disintegrating before our eyes, that its next playing maybe its last. And so we maintain a fairly strict protocol where we do not listen to these items just because we're interested in listening to them. We wait until we have the opportunity to digitize them, and then that is potentially its last playing, and then we've digitized it and we have it forever then.
Far fewer materials today are on paper, which makes collecting a challenge. When someone passes away in the 21st century, the physical items in their home are apparent, but what about what's on their computer? In place of a lifetime of letters, do we lose all those emails, the Google photo collection, the Facebook check-ins? The earliest known archive is a collection of Sumerian business records from between 4000 and 3000 BCE. These are clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform characters, and they have existed for millennia.
If we think about those Sumerian archives, they are what we might call business records, transactions. And I'm not a Assyriologist, and that's not my area of expertise, but I have to assume that those archives, they had no sense of X millennia down the road. Rather, they're like, I need this record to demonstrate something or to prove something or to justify something now. In the way that we have receipts. Sadly, those are all in heat-sensitive paper and will not last nearly as long as the clay tablets, but that's another story.
This is Haverford College professor Darren Hayton, whose expertise is in history and philosophy of science.
I would say that our biggest archive is, in fact, the mundane. It's the least celebrated, but we produce all sorts of pointless things, but they're not pointless. They are, in fact, the record of existence. And what the Sumerian archives, the archives that we have, most of those are accidental. The clay tablets happen to get caught in fires that burned them and cured them, and they could then preserve a long time. The environment is one that they don't degrade. So the long-term nature of that archive is accidental. When we see what cultures and societies produce, we get a sense of their values and what is potentially at issue, what is at stake. The mundane doesn't produce an archive for something that will never be contested. It won't ever be drawn into question. We produce archives for moments where there may be a contest, there may be a disagreement, there may be a need to demonstrate something, and the need to demonstrate something grows out of the need to prove something because somebody's doubtful. And in the world we live in, we have to produce a lot of that stuff because if we look back in the past at whether it's Sumerian or more recent mundane archives, we continue to produce a lot of that material. But because it is mundane, we don't think of it as valuable. We don't, as a rule, think of it as valuable. And it's produced by and structured by the values that societies have established. And then once they outlive like the clay tablets, oftentimes it's only accidental that they survive. And then at some point, somebody's like, oh, now it's old enough to be interesting. Clay tablets. Okay, I'm a historian because history is the mother discipline. And what I mean by that is we don't, in the end of the day, turn to science. We always turn to history. And history is the justification in the present, even if we have to make that history up. And so communities recognize that creating a history is an important means of establishing authority. And the nature, the sort of physical nature of that history varies. I think there's something really important about a community when it shifts from ephemeral history, what we tend to call oral, and moves to physical history. There are lots of communities that have had histories, but those histories don't leave traces. And I think there are a lot of communities that have a historical identity and understand history, but that it's not bound up in things. And so in that instance, an archive looks in some ways as a more exclusive thing because you have to participate in the community in a particular way to have access to that archive and be able, and it's a participatory archive. But it's also it challenges our notion of what an archive is. And I think that's an important shift from intangible to, I'm glibly calling it intangible to tangible, because the communities that have demonstrated their social and cultural and political authority often do so by virtue of having tangible archives. And so when a community that hasn't been a dominant part of a larger culture begins to create a material archive for itself, recognizes that as something that's desirable to do, part of that process is an implicit recognition that material archives are better than non-material archives. They're more authoritative in the culture writ large. So I think these communities, when they create material archives, they are, again, implicitly or not, there's a recognition that this is a means by which the community can participate more fully in the broader society's understanding of what it means to have history. Because, things without history don't really exist. We fabricate those histories. The more a community can demonstrate its history, and the more concretely, i.e. materially, perhaps even though if we circle back to something we said earlier, the more mundane, the more that community can demonstrate that it belongs, it has a right at the table, it is part and parcel of the bigger project.
Over a long enough timeline, history ceases to be a chronology of events and becomes stories. Individuals and populations become characters with desires, strengths, and weaknesses. The archives provide us with more than history. It's living memory, showing us who these people are and letting us interact with them. If aliens ever do arrive long after humanity is gone from the face of the earth and find the John J. Wilcox Jr. LGBTQ archives, would they recognize the uniqueness of the community, and would they glean their place in the larger civilization that once existed?
So I think it wouldn't be easy. And there are, shall we say, technological challenges that might limit how much they can pull out. But let's for a moment say they just got of old cassette tapes in one archive, and what they have in the other archive are big reel-to-reel tapes. Even just there, they'd be able to say, okay, one archive is this artifact is a small pocketable. Let's assume that these aliens are roughly our size, so it's pocketable. And these others would require much more effort to carry around. These are self-contained, these are not. The technology that would make both of them meaningful is going to look different. One's going to be bigger, one's going to be smaller, one's obviously portable, one's maybe portable. So even without getting anything off of those tapes, the physical structure of those tapes as objects could reveal a lot. So I think it would be possible. Again, it'd be a lot of work.
But very hard, yeah.
The material that we have here, the repository that we have here, is a living thing. And what does that mean? That means you need to connect with it. So that's what my job is, to connect people with the living thing that are the memories and the stories that are here, and to make them feel that kind of connection, just like you'd connect with another person.
This year, the William Way LGBT Community Center announced its John J. Wilcox Jr. Archives was selected as the next host site for the Preservation in Action program during the American Library Association's 2025 conference and exhibition. Each year during the conference, PIA partners with a local cultural institution to host a day-long preservation project highlighting the vital role of preserving history and cultural heritage. In June 2025, William Way also announced that the Spruce Street site is being listed for sale, following years of community input, vision, and what it calls a, quote, strategic shift away from an earlier redevelopment plan. The structure was built pre-Civil War and would require more investment in repairs and safety updates, even before it could be redeveloped into a more suitable home for the needs of the center, its library, and its archives. And that's the goal now, even as this year saw operating hours reduced due to staffing cutbacks. The new difficulties with securing funding for LGBTQ services and the dangerous political climate have not stopped the center from maintaining the signature services it has provided in its nearly 50-year legacy of serving Philadelphia's LGBTQIA+ community. The search for a new home is on, and if you want to support the effort, visit waygate.org/support. Special thanks to Amy E. Slayton, Ph.D., Professor Emerita at Drexel University's Department of History and the co-editor of the journal History and Technology. She provided vital background information and context. And Taylor Lumpkin, Public Relations Specialist with En Route, for turning me onto this story.